So the sign, you read the sign right. I'm talking about transformation through transition today. And those two words aren't standalone words. They certainly interrelate because there are times in our life when it seems to us primarily external events are going to force us to make a transition in who we are and the way we go about our business in our life. And you don't always have to change a lot. That's where the transformation comes in. But a lot of times you can be very well suited to go ahead and make a transformation to deal with this transition that is going on in your life. And so these transitions can be pretty small, pretty nondescript, such as like the transition we make going from grade school to middle school. They can require a little more work and a little more stepping out of our comfort zone, such as when we first move away from our parents' house, we either go to college or go to the workforce, and now we're responsible for putting the roof over our head, going to the grocery store for ourselves, and being financially responsible. They can be a change in our life where we choose to bring another person into our life for a very long time and perhaps forever, such as when we go through the act of marriage. And every now and then you have transitions where you will never, ever be allowed to be the same person you were before that transition. And my favorite transition of that is the transition of the caterpillar. And we're well versed to talk about caterpillar because we're on the national map of a monarch butterfly sanctuary, aren't we? Thanks to Bob. And my background is in engineering, not biology, so I'm going to talk about the caterpillar. I don't know whether to call it he, she, or it. So the biologists in the room cut me a little slack, and I'll probably just go back and forth. So what about this transformation? So this caterpillar, he has to give up his entire identity. He can no longer crawl around. He can no longer eat leaves. If he has an ego or she has an ego, that has to go out the door. And there is a vision of this beautiful, revered butterfly at the end of the picture. So the caterpillar has to have faith in the creative process, but it's giving up a whole lot, because it actually has to turn into this substance I'll describe in a technical term, goo, and just sit there and trust in the creative process, trust that the law is going to work, and in a few weeks it will emerge from the chrysalis, this beautiful, loved, revered butterfly that we all know and love to watch. And so this community is in transition. And this community, there's a transformation that has to happen. We all know by now our beloved Reverend Josh took a fabulous position at the premier place in our movement, Mile High Church in Denver. And we all know his message is humble and empowering and changes lives. And we all know how the creative process works and the law of attraction works. And we all know it's good and right for him to spread that message to more and more people. With all that said, at the same time, I know I, and I'm sure all of you, will miss him dearly. So when we look at transitions and transformations, for me, I like to take a step back and take a couple of deep breaths and sort of figure out where I've come from and where I need to go as I go forward with this. And I'm going to share with you three spiritual principles, or mindsets if you want to call them, about three transitions that actually I've just had in my life very recently. And the first spiritual principle is you go back and review the ethics that brought you to this point in time. And that set of ethics will bring you forward to the future to be the person that you need to be. My examples from this, some of you know that my father passed away 2 months ago. And he gave me about 80% of my ethics. And so I'll use some examples from him. The second spiritual principle, which I've learned to understand since I've been here, and the model of that is our beloved Reverend Josh, it's a spiritual principle about being in relationship with others, especially about with your family, your friends, and your extended community. Because Reverend Josh did that better than anyone I've ever met. And the third aspect, it seems simple, but it may be the most important. When you're at this space, you have to get to a place where you absolutely allow yourself to be loved. Not to love someone else, to be at a space where you're vulnerable enough where you can allow yourself to be loved. So the first principle, it's about my dad, and I have a lot of great memories about my father. And my father was a bit of a stoic, which I'm sure a lot of those from the great generation, their dads were. So his training and what he gave me was not these kind, gentle words of wisdom and this nurturing hugging all the time. But what he told, his examples were by example, by action, and by steadfast determination. And what I learned from all this, from watching him, is what a hardworking, focused, determined, yet very joyful, compassionate, and loving man can be in this world. And I'm truly thankful for all the things that he told me. Not told me, I learned most of these by watching his example. And so the first thing he told me was always take care of those around you that you love. And he did that from the time I can remember. He was always there. For some reason, we always had enough money. He was always willing to do what it took for our family to be good. Both my brother and I were big-time basketball players, and my dad would work shift work, and so he would work from 8 to 4, and then he'd have to do what they call double back, and he'd have to be at work at midnight again. So he'd work from 8 to 4 and come watch both my brothers and I's basketball games. And he'd get maybe 1 hour sleep and then go back to work for midnight to 8 a.m. And I remember asking him, why do you do that? And he looked at me, he says, because I'm your dad. And during ministerial school, there was a message or a learning. They were talking about the male archetype in the Jungian philosophy. And one of the concepts of male archetype, it sacrifices itself for the good of the tribe. And somehow it struck me very deeply. And now, since I put this talk together, I know because it reminded me of my dad. The second thing he told me was, whatever you do, always continue to improve yourself, and whatever you do, always get a college education. It will open up all the doors for you. You see, he was a brilliant man. He was a programmer and radar technician for the Federal Aviation Agency, worked there for 34 years, retired early at age 59. But he used to have to program in machine language. And so machine language is zeros and ones and doing very complex things back in the day. And for those of us who are used to speaking into their phone and getting everything we want done, doing things that way was a whole lot more harder and more complex, let me tell you. But my mom ratted him out about the education stuff because he was brilliant. My family was all in math and science. But he struggled because he couldn't do the English to finish his degree. My mom told me the true story about that. He had always had his girlfriends write his English papers for him in high school. And so I listened to him. My brother listened to him. My brother went on to get a degree in physics, and I was ready to start school. I was told last at 9 o'clock, I dated myself by saying this. I had to take this test called the ACT test. And back then, if you made a 28 on the overall score, or you made a 28 on the verbal part of it, which is the English part of it, you could place out of freshman English. And I didn't quite make the 28 on the verbal. I came close, 24 or something like that. But I did so well in the math and science score that I placed out of freshman English. And then I chose an engineering curriculum, so the only requirement for English in college was freshman English. And I remember when I went home and told that story, I remember watching my dad's face grow from a slight smile to an ear-to-ear grin. And he was so proud of me for doing that. But for this day, him imprinting that on me early on has made me the lifelong learner that I am. And for this day, this is one of the things that I love to do and I'll continue to do. And the last thing that I'm going to share with you that he told me was this, when he said, son, and when he says son, that means you're supposed to shut up and listen. He says, son, understand that never, ever give up on your dreams and never, ever be willing to work hard and hard and hard, however long it takes to do that. And for me, I remember him coming into my room, my brothers and I's room. I was like in 5th grade or something. And he would show me the checks that my mom and him had wrote every 2 weeks to save for our college education. So they were dedicated to do that. And for me, somehow that sunk in. And so for me, the most important thing I've ever done in my life has become a minister. Now, I've had a lot of trials and tribulations. And so from the time I first started wanting to do that was 25 years before I finished it. But somehow I had ingrained in me that sense of never giving up. So those are my ethics, and my ethics aren't your ethics. But your ethics are not what someone else has projected and imposed upon you that you do begrudgingly. Your ethics is what you see works. And I guarantee you that your ethics have been touched by your intuition, that part inside of you that knows the best and possible path for you. So I just urge you to go take a look at your ethics. And what's brought you here is going to bring you forward in the future in a way that only you can do it. So the second spiritual principle I want to share with you came from our beloved Reverend Josh. So we had a gathering of the practitioner body when he announced that he was leaving the center. And people said, we love your messages. It feels like it hits us right where we live, right where we are, right where we live. It's our problems and our dreams and our visions. So is that true? Is a lot of people like that in here? Yeah. And what Reverend Josh said to them, and he's told me many a time, is that that's because my message is not about me. My message is about the people I'm in community with. My message is about their hearts, their dreams, their ambitions. I'm just a talking head. And Reverend Josh did that very well for each of us. I know that when we were in a conversation with him, he made us feel like we were intently listened to. He made us feel like we were the most important person in the world. And I'm reading a book called The Great Leap by Gay Hendricks. And he says there's different zones that we can do in terms of how we go through life. When we're in the zone of excellence, we do things very, very well. and get a lot of respect for it. But when we reach the zone of brilliance, which is what we were brought to this planet to do, we're in the zone where in what we do, people are just in awe of it. And by far, Reverend Josh had this sense of being in community with individuals, with groups, better than anyone I've ever seen. So the message that I learned as a minister is it's a very powerful way to share wisdom by just being in community with people. And that message and that way of being is not prevalent very much among a lot of ministers. Most ministers will give you their wisdom, and sometimes it resonates, and sometimes it doesn't. And we all have, none of us can be like Reverend Josh is, and Ralph Waldo Emerson gives us 2 words of wisdom on that. The first, it's interesting, because I had it in my talk, but I didn't have it, and Reverend Josh put it on the board out there on the sign. First thing Emerson told us is imitation, he's pretty blunt, he says imitation is suicide, meaning if I was trying to do song and dance up here, you guys would be like leaving the room right away. But we all know what we do good. And I always try and tell people, go do your passion, because your passion is going to be so much better than anything else you can do. And the other thing Emerson tells us about that is we were all created. He says, every individual is yet another incarnation of the divine mind. Because we all come from one mind, from one space, from this sense of oneness. But we're all individuals. We all have our personalities. We all have something that we do very, very well. And so even though we can't imitate what Reverend Josh did and get in this zone of brilliance, when we're going through this transition, it's going to help us with our transformation to get out of our own stuff and just absolutely be there for the other person. And so for me, that's been a huge learning experience, because I grew from a very intellectual background, and now the most important thing in my ministry is community. And so the last spiritual principle I want to share with you, it's a very simple one, but it's maybe perhaps the most profound one I can talk about. It's that the ability to allow yourself to be in a position where you can be loved. And this happened in a transition with my life, because I co-created this great partner in Nicole and this wonderful family, and Haley and Gabriel. You guys all know Nicole, and she's dynamic, enthusiastic, always caring, always loving, and I get to have that every day. And yet at the same time, part of having a partner is having a best friend. So she's the one that tells me, Michael, when you said that in that way, don't you understand why it wasn't accepted that well? She's the one that's always my sounding board, always does the, I won't even call it tough love, because nothing about Nicole is tough. She's just enthused with love. And, but if you really want to know how to be loved, just go hang out with children. I mean, sometimes I have to discipline Gabe and Haley, and for Haley it lasts an hour, for Gabe it lasts 5 minutes. And then it's like their entire role in my life is just to have fun, have joy, and love me, and love the mom, and love each other, and go play with their friends, and make good grades and everything like that. But it doesn't have to be just your immediate family. I mean, it doesn't have to be, because the one thing that I think this community has above all other communities is when you walk in that back door, if you need love, you will get it in this community. Now, sometimes when we're in trouble, we can walk back and sort of cross our arms and go sit in the corner. And sometimes we have to make a step to get that love. We have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to ask for it. And so sometimes, and I know I like to respect people's space. And Nicole is more outgoing than I do. But sometimes you have to be vulnerable enough to let people know you're in this space and you really could use some love. Because I absolutely know that we will get it in this space. So those are my 3 lessons that I've learned. If they work for you, you can make use of them. And now, if you will, I'd like to close in prayer. And let's just go within to the absolutely wonderful and fabulous place inside where all is well. Go within to our understanding that God truly is all there is, that I am this wonderful, beautiful, joyful, radiant aspect of that one, and I know that each and every one of us here is that same beautiful aspect of that one. And I know that we can always go inside for wisdom. We can always go back and reflect on that sense of ethics that came from people, but also came from God or Spirit itself, that teaches us how to live our life and what we need to go forward. We can also go to that place that Reverend Josh modeled so well, that we can give up all of ourselves and reach out and be in community, be in absolute loving relationship with other people. And then we can be at that place where we're vulnerable enough that we can absolutely accept and feel blessed and radiated by the love of this community, of our family, and everyone we come in contact with. And for this life of spirit, for this life of joy, for this life of wonder, for this life of togetherness, for this life of laughter, for this life of wisdom, I can just say thank you, thank you, thank you, Father, Mother, God, that it is so, and it is me right here and right now. And if you will, help me ground this by saying together, and so it is. Thank you.